Welcome back, Honors. All right, so some of y'all are probably, look, I'm recording this flip. I'm guessing right now. We could possibly get to this point in class. We may have not gotten to this point in class. We'll figure it out. It's going to be fine, but we're about to wrap this unit up right now. All right, so anyway, what we talked about in class, I know for sure, without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, is we did talk about the Rurikids, right? We talked about Ivan Vasilyevich, right? So Ivan Vasilyevich, Ivan the Fourth, Ivan the Terrible, right? We talked about him and his grandfather pushing the Mongols out, and then we talked about how he began to consolidate power and centralize around the nobles, right? He then stripped this power from them, earning him probably the nickname Ivan the Terrible, right? And then continuing forward, though, we told the famous story about how he had another son named Ivan. All right, so, and then that guy ends up dead, and poor Fedor, just eating chicken nuggets and coloring in his coloring book down at the other end of the table the whole time. But he got to take over all of Russia, which was really, really politically a bad day right now. But we may have gotten into this guy in class, and if we did, just fast forward, okay, until you get to a point that we didn't. But let's go ahead and get after it. So in 1613, following this thing known as the Time of Troubles, right, after Fedor dies and, Polish-Lithuania, beats Russia for, a period of time, which is absolutely embarrassing, and all this other stuff goes down, the Russian nobles decide that they now need to get together and they need to appoint a new czar, right, a powerful one from a powerful family. So the most powerful noble family gets to take over, and they were known as the Romanovs, right? And the Romanov family, under Mikhail Romanov, the very first one, right, is going to rule over Russia from 1613 up until 1917. So one family ruled over all of Russia for 300 years, right? That is absolutely insane. Absolutism? Absolutely insane. Good one, right? But anyway, so this is the most famous of all the Romanovs. Well, actually, that's debatable. Some people would say Catherine the Great is the most famous of all the Romanovs, but actually, technically, she wasn't a Romanov until she got married. Anyway, though, going into it, though, this is probably the most famous out of the Romanovs. This majestic man, who was 6'8", a gigantor, is Peter the Great, right? So Peter the Great, right? Peter the Great had one mission in mind. My biggest job as an absolutist is I am here to modernize Russia, right? So it's something you got to understand is when the Mongols were in power, that kind of set Russia behind the rest of Europe by 300 years, right? Russia didn't have a navy. Russia didn't have any ports to trade out of. Russia was a landlocked country, severely landlocked at that, cold, frozen in most of it, right out in Siberia. The only people that they could really trade with were members from the Silk Road, but that was a very mountainous terrain they couldn't cross. What they wanted to do was become more European. This guy, Peter the Great, is the reason why you think of Russia as Western, right? Why you think of Russia as not being an Eastern civilization. You think of Russia as being a Western civilization from Western Europe because of Peter the Great, right? So, because Russia was super backwards, right? They were extremely backwards, actually. And he decides, you know what? I'm going to take a journey. I'm going to travel all over the place, and I'm going to see some cool stuff, and I'm going to modernize my country. And he called it, write this down, his Grand Tour, right? His Grand Tour. Peter the Great's Grand Tour of the West. He decides that he's going to start popping around to these different countries. It's I'm going to go to England, and I'm going to learn how to wage war with the Navy. I'm going to go to the Netherlands, and I'm going to learn how to make boats, right? Oh, then I'm going to go back to England, and I'm going to learn intercoastal economics, right? And then I'm going to go to France, and I'm going to learn how to be a diplomat, right? And I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, right? And so he actually ends up getting called back early from his grand tour because he has to go to war with this dude from Finland named Charles. But that's not important, all right? So he modernized Russia, though, okay? He went out and saw all of Western Europe, and he brought all of these amazing things back. Because let's get a look at him real quick. Let's look at old Peter real fast. Peter don't look Russian. You know who looks Russian? That guy, right? So Ivan looks very Russian. Ivan the Terrible looks super Russian. That's what the Boyars and the Russians dressed like before Peter the Great, right? Peter the Great, on the other hand, brings back all of these things that he's seen, right? Look at Peter, right? Look at him. He looks more like a cavalier than he does a Russian, right? So he develops the Russian Navy after this grand tour, and he makes Russia an important European state, right? So he also brings about gigantic military changes. He creates a standing professional army in there somewhere of 210,000 men ready to fight at any moment, fully equipped, most of them. Russia's always had a really, really tough time giving weapons to their military. In 1914, they had people running into World War I with like no guns, and they were like, you'll find your weapons amongst the dead. Now, anyway, he also brought about massive cultural changes. He created a book of Russian manners. He forced men to shave their beards, right? If you were going to enter into Moscow, you had to be cleanly shaven. At the city gates, there were actually men there ready to cut the beard off of your face, right? So he brought more rights to women because in Russia, women had to walk around all of Moscow with a veil over their face if they were out in public. He abolished the veiled woman of Russia, right? He also made it so if you wanted to talk to him about any means of state, you had to talk to him in French, right? Because that was the language of the diplomats, right? So he also made it so you had to, I'm trying to think of other like cultural reforms that he had. Peter the Great, cultural changes. I know there was more of them, but for some reason I just can't remember them right now. So, like, heavily influenced by his advisors, along my lines, making Russian maritime power, accomplishments, reforms, and death. Rule, we know that he ruled on this brother. Sweeping changes, here we go. He wanted to increase technological advancements, of course. Oh, he brought about the Julian calendar. I forgot about that. Apparently in Russia, up until Peter the Great, they thought it was like the year 7000 or something ridiculous like that. They were like, oh, it's been a long time since the beginning of the world, right? So we're like the year 7000. He actually adopted the proper calendar and then used the dating system of the Western Europe, right? So he actually brought around the Julian calendar, right? So forms of government, blah, blah, blah. Well, anyway, so obviously making Russian men shave their beards is a really, really intense thing, right? Making them all speak French to you is a really intense thing. But then he wasn't satisfied with that. He was like, you know what? We might be modern now, but we don't have a modern capital, right? So when he looked around Moscow, he saw an old city, right? He saw a very, very old city with very, very old Mongol-like characteristics and very, very old, different style. Remember, when we looked at St. Basil's Cathedral, right, in the Red Square, built by Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, Ivan Rurikid, right? St. Basil's shares more architectural schemes with the East than it does with the West. And he was like, you know what, Moscow looks like an Eastern city. We need a new capital. We need a port city because we have a navy now, right? So let's move this bad boy. So he created the capital of St. Petersburg, right? Not named after himself, named after St. Peter, as in St. Peter, the first Pope, St. Peter, right? So, and he created this place that became the window to the West. And it would become the new Russian capital up until the year 1918 when Lenin won the Civil War against the Reds versus the Whites. We'll talk about that later. Now, this port city brought new ideas, new goods, and westernization into Russia, right? Now, they were still dramatically behind, right? They really, really were when it came to military advancements and infrastructure, you know what I mean? They're not going to catch on to the Industrial Revolutions until much later, but this is a massive step in the right direction. Peter the Great is a phenomenal ruler, and he ends up dying later on in his life from a consistent bladder infection that he got all the time. He apparently, got out of the boat, tried to save somebody, and then, got super sick and died. But his family would rule on and on and on and on and on for several hundred more years. But he is the guy responsible for making you think that Russia is Western and not Eastern. All right, so because look at this bad boy. St. Petersburg looks like a city in Western Europe. And it reminds me a lot of Amsterdam, actually, if anything else, right? With the canals and the port towns and that's the winter. And this right here. That's his palace, the Winter Palace, right? The Winter Palace built in the same architectural style as the Palace of Versailles, except the Winter Palace is a little bit more what you would call Rococo and less Baroque. All right, so now, anyway, that is the end of this unit. That is Russia under Peter the Great. I'll see you guys later. Y'all have a good one.